All right, I'm just getting my screen set up here. It's so good to see you all this morning. I believe Marion is going to be joining us in a little bit, so I will keep an eye out in the waiting room for her. Yeah, so it's good to see you. And so this is our third, we're going quickly. This is our third in the series of 5 on Luke 15, where we're studying the parable of the prodigal son and Rembrandt's art piece, The Return of the Prodigal Son, and using Henri Nouwen's book to guide us, which has been just a beautiful way to explore some of the deep and rich themes of both the painting and the parable. So I'm so glad that you're here. And I thought that maybe we would, let's see here. Yeah, so that was just review from last week. But keeping in mind those main themes that we see in the Gospel of Luke that are also present in these parables, where we're now at the point of the parable where there's this big feast happening, and we know the older brother isn't happy about it. So the role of meals as opportunities for reconciliation and healing, ministry to those that are excluded. And then I think, Diana, you had shared a quote you had read about how this parable is really the story of our salvation, or could be used to think about that journey. So, and that's a very prominent theme in Luke as well. So I thought maybe we just read the whole parable today, because I feel like there's always something new to encounter when we read the whole thing, and it's not very long. Herb, would you start us off?
Sure. Do you want me to read this whole text on this screen?
Sure. Or
Okay.
if you have it in the Bible
Sure.
in front of you, that's fine too.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. The prodigal son and his brother. Then Jesus said, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the young son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything.
Is there someone else who'd like to read the second part?
I can.
Thank you, Nancy.
But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' And so he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. And then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate."
I wonder what new reflections or observations have come to you in the past week about the journey of the younger brother in this parable. Did anything pop up since we last met or stand out?
I just want to call attention to verse 17, when the younger son says, "But when he came to himself, he said, ... This will be the topic for today. Some versions say he came to his senses, but I like this, when he came to himself. to who he was really meant to be, was back with his father. And then we're going to discuss today the choice awaiting the other brother. Will he come to himself and who he can truly be too? So I just love that phrase, when he came to himself.
I do too. I think it's a lovely way to maybe describe that act of repentance and turning around. I also appreciate that that line, and I think it also speaks to how, Nouwen in the book talks about the inner light of God that lives within him, and how this parable and this painting have helped him to identify God's dwelling within him. And so that coming to ourselves, there's being made in the divine image, there is something good and divine in us, so that we can come to.
Yeah, if I might add, the modern science has come to a conclusion that our brain doesn't complete its full growth until we're about 30 years old. So part of the thinking is we don't always make good decisions, but if you can get to 30, then things seem to stabilize. So this is how I sort of responded to this young man. He was just unformed, not completely formed. So his impulses guided his thinking rather than good thinking. And now, quote, modern science is sort of supporting that idea that, but then you come to your senses, if you would, or you come to yourself, your full self. So.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's definitely a turning point. So, yeah, who knows? But I think that's good to point that out, Diane. That's sort of the pivotal moment for him.
Right? That act of that conscious act of change. There's something changed for him, whether you call that repentance or coming to yourself, but there's a pivotal moment there.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't get to this slide last week. This is obviously not Rembrandt. I've been digging around in the Princeton Online Art Library and Vanderbilt's Online Art Library, and there isn't, what I found when I was teaching Jonah is there's so much art from Jonah, and there is not as much, surprisingly, with the Prodigal Son, and definitely not as much kind of outsider or folk art to explore. But this image was I think I originally found it in the Princeton Library, but James Tissot did a series of etchings on the Prodigal Son, and this is one. And the critics have noticed, the father's hat has fallen off. He's rushed out to greet his son here on the docks. So it's a more modern, I guess modern for the 19th century viewing of this. And Nouwen says in the book that Jesus makes it clear that the way to God is the same as the way to a new childhood. And so I wonder, in light of what you said, John, about our brains developing and then also needing to return to be more childlike, perhaps that's why the process is so difficult. I don't know if you all had thoughts about that part of the book or not.
Well, we're encouraged by Jesus to be childlike in our faith, not childish, but childlike, in that, tendency as we get older is to be, quote, sophisticated, and therefore we overthink things, and we get tied up in theological debates. And always the master was always saying, you're all God asks of us is to have faith and desire to follow, and so that's to me the childlike image. And if you're blessed with having new neighbors like I do, with the six-year-old or 7-year-old and a 5-year-old boys and observe them in their play, I mean, you just get the sense of that. You know, they're just joyful, and in the way they behave. You know. So anyway.
Right. Yeah, I think it's an interesting juxtaposition, the difference between childish and childlike.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful painting, by the way. That's a different perspective. But it's yeah, that embrace, the son with the father like that. That's I like that one.
Well, being an old Navy man, I like it because it to me, this son has come back from the sea, and who God knows how many years he was at sea, and he's being embraced by his father, and
Yeah.
at least that's the way I see the picture. But
Right. And I wonder what it is about that embrace that sort of embodies becoming like a child. Perhaps that ability to just accept God's love and God's forgiveness like a child does. You know, they just open arms with a hug.
well, the fact that he's on his knees, I mean, you know, if he was upright and they're embracing, it would be a totally different nuance to the picture, you know. But the fact he's on his knees, you could just hear him, you know, forgive me, Father, you know, I've been a jerk.
Yes.
And
Yes,
I think that's why the process is so difficult for us, because our task as we become adults is to be autonomous, to not depend, or, you know, to be on par with everyone. And it is so the process of making yourself like a child, to acknowledge your dependence on God, it rubs against who we like to think of ourselves of as adults. And children have
That's our culture, you know, that it's self-reliance. I mean, it is so deeply in our culture. That's, I think, you know, and you look back at what you studied, and yeah, I remember a couple of history or literature classes in college, and, you know, you studied Emerson and Thoreau and, you know, these great Enlightenment thinkers of the 1800s, I guess. And this self-reliant spirit is just woven throughout it all. I can stand on my own. And that's not what Jesus preached.
Right. And so the fact that Jesus taught about it maybe points to the fact that this is a universal human challenge throughout history, this self-reliance and reliance on God. And and how, as we grow in our journey, in our faith journey, how that evolves for us, for each of us. Well, and how does it evolve for the elder son? Now I've noticed that I've left out the H and in the title of this, and I can't let go of this typo I've made. So now we have the end of the story. The elder brother is a little bit of our focus today. Diane, would you be willing to read this? There's 2 slides to this, if you would be willing to read them both.
Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked, "What's going on?" He replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound." Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him.
Oops, hold on. One too many.
But he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years, I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found."
Thank you, Diane. And thank you for the reading it in a way that gives us a hint of the kind of resentment that Nouwen names in this in this elder son. He is very, very resentful. So I'm wondering what stands out for you in this part of the parable that is about the elder son, in light of what we've spoken about.
I would, my observation would be that this is the example of those of us who, obey the rules and we honor God and we're good Christians and good people. God didn't come to save us. We're already saved, but to one who's lost, every effort is made to save those who are lost. And so that's where the rejoicing of the angels in heaven when one mortal turns his life around is probably a big event. And so that's sort of what, for me, I sort of take that away, is that for those of us who obey and are dutiful sons and daughters, I mean, we're okay. It's our lost brothers and sisters that need attention. And but the resentment, I mean, I can see that. I've observed it in my own family, and so.
Yes, and Nouwen describes that resentment is the elder son leaving. So there's the prodigal son, the leaving and returning is very clear, but I thought that was an interesting way to look at the elder son leaving, that resentment. I don't know what others thought of that perspective in the book, or if you had a chance to read it.
Well,
I haven't read the book. I'm not sure what you mean by it.
Yeah, so thank you, Marion, and good to see you. So in the book, it's divided into chapters, and so there's a chapter on the prodigal son, and now we're the chapter on the elder son, and the subheadings of the chapters are the elder son leaving, which I find quite interesting because in this, in the parable, he doesn't leave, and Nouwen describes this resentment that he feels as a leaving. Help me out, others who read that maybe can explain that a little bit as well.
Is he pushing it away? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that idea that he's pushing the father away, that he holds this resentment, and that's creating a distance between him and his father. And we see that a little bit in the painting when Nouwen points out just how far away the elder brother is.
And how judging he looks.
Right.
Well, I think Nouwen, somewhere in the book, he compares the older brother to the scribes and Pharisees they're always looking over Jesus's shoulder and they're looking for ways to trip him up, and eventually they kind of convict him in their minds. And he looks, that's sort of the image I have of the Pharisees that are really upset that Jesus is turning their world upside down.
Right. And thank you for bringing up that some of the other parables about Pharisees were close. Well, particularly the parable about the Pharisee and the tax collector was closely linked with the prodigal son in Rembrandt's time. And so this painting is sort of not accurate because we know the son he's not there when this embrace happens, right? He's off. He hears about the party. He's still working, and so Nouwen points out that and we don't have to read this whole thing, but the Pharisee and the tax collector is how a little bit maybe why Rembrandt painted the elder son this way, and it talks about that righteousness. The righteousness. the Pharisee, I thank you that I'm not like these other people, the self-righteous. So the elder son being like the self-righteous people. And then in the end, there's the tax collector who is, won't even look up to heaven, but is beating his breast and said, God, have mercy on me. And so they say, if you look here, this man behind him is clutching his breast in that, non-self-righteous way, I guess, if I'm explaining that well from the book.
Another aspect, go ahead, Nancy.
Well, I was just going to say this goes back, in my mind, what you were saying earlier about having a childlike relationship with God, all trusting, all believing. The older son, in being self-righteous and judging and not being able to forgive his sibling, not being able to have that unconditional love, is not being childlike in his faith and relationship to God. But I love the parable, because who of us doesn't struggle with, being completely unconditional in our love and forgiving everyone, right?
And I think that idea of, Jesus is speaking to us through two different sons, right? I mean, it's easy to say, oh, well, I'm not the prodigal son. I never did anything that bad. I'm the elder son. I stay. Well, Jesus had a word for us as well. if depending on who you imagine yourself to be in this parable. But Jesus doesn't let the elder son off the hook.
For me, there's a couple things about both this painting and also the story that Jesus is trying to keep our focus on the Great Commission to work with the lost. The younger son misses the whole homecoming because he's out in the fields doing the work, but the father was looking for the lost son. And so I think there's a message for me in that about what is the thing I think is central to my Christian journey. Is it looking for my lost brother, or is it doing all these good works? And so that is it. I like the way that Rembrandt does have the elder son present for the homecoming, even though it didn't happen that way in the story, because that's the central point, is the younger son coming home. And one other thing about the language of the text, the son goes out of his way to call the prodigal, this son of yours, and the father goes out of his way to say, this brother of yours. And I think it's again a statement to us about considering our brothers as a primary focus for us.
Right, this son of yours.
That's
Yeah.
those are great comments, Diane. Thank you.
That's what I love about doing Bible study in a group, is that everyone brings insights that we all can share. So yes, thank you for that. And I think also the piece that I was hearing, Diana, is Diane, is this idea that maybe the life of faith is both internal. It's the things that we do, maybe that work in the fields, but it's also that external, relationships with other people. It's maybe not one or the other, in my understanding, that we do need to be, living faithful lives and practicing our faith internally, but we also, that needs to extend out to the world, to our brothers and sisters. So this is also the same artist, Tissot, and this is the elder son leaving. Nouwen's chapter is the elder son leaving. So here we have the prodigal son, and here we have the elder son. And I think this is so interesting, the way he's looking sort of, I think, wistfully at the sea, and I wonder, is he pondering his own leaving? And that the Nouwen's the second quote on here, that I hear a deeper complaint from this elder son, the complaint that comes from the heart that feels it never received what it was due. So how many of us, sort of hold that self-righteous, oh, well, I never did anything wrong, but secretly we're like, oh, why didn't I take that chance? I wanted to try that too. So I think that's where, the elder son's leaving is not a physical leaving his father, but how does that resentment and that longing maybe create this distance? How does this painting strike you, John? With the ships and the navy, is that?
Well, it looks like it's a New England scene to me. This is a very instructive in that, we know parables can speak to every level of human mind. Every human being can come away with something from a parable, and that's the beauty of its technique. And as with the painting, you can see things, and I think I saw him, the elder son, sort of being disinterested in what was going on, and he's just stargazing or out the window and not paying attention, which is totally different from what you were seeing. So it's interesting. It's in our mind what we
It's
see.
really true, because when I look at him, he feels to me like he's being huffy, and he's like, why is no one seeing that I am checked out and resentful about this? It's like, fine, I'll just look over here. But then the wistfulness part is, these are all such interesting dimensions.
Yeah.
Right. Well, and maybe I'm reading it differently than
No, I
it
think
was
it's
intended.
really rich. It's really rich. But I agree. He took the path. I did what was asked,
Yeah.
That was
Right.
it.
Hopefully
And so
he
I
learns a
should,
lesson from his
be
father.
heralded.
Hopefully he sees his father someday as a model. He doesn't at that moment, but hopefully
Good point. Yeah.
Right. Yes. And I just am noticing this morning that what's happening here with the hands. How do you all see this interchange between the prodigal son and the father? What do you think is happening there?
Well, to me, the father's reaching out, in such a longing way. You can almost feel his pain at his son's departure in the way he's holding his hands. But it looks to me like the younger son is rebuffing his outreach.
Withholding. Yeah.
Yeah.
Something.
Is this the wallet? Is this his inheritance? Is he
Could
is he
be.
pulling it away? I don't know.
He doesn't look as broken either, the younger son.
Right. Well, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I just thought of that. This is the younger son pre coming to his senses. The older brother, who's out in the field, hasn't seen the conversion of his brother yet. He's remembering this guy who grabs the money and looks so contemptuously toward his father.
Oh.
So I'm kind of thinking, again, because he didn't see the younger son come and say, I'm not worthy to be your son and all of that. Maybe once he gets into the party, it's all going to be good. That's what I'm going to hope.
So
this painting
The departure. Yeah. I mean,
right.
That's what it's called.
So he's about to head out to his life of wine, women, and song.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. And funny enough, there are not many artists who paint this part of the story or depict this part of the story. So I found it really interesting that this artist had painted both the hey dad, I'm taking off, and then the return, both by the shipyard. So yeah. So this
good.
is it's not Rembrandt, but I do think art is really helpful, especially on Zoom, to kind of think about different dimensions of the story.
Yeah, well, Tissot is a quite famous artist of biblical, history, religious works.
Yeah. And so yeah, Nouwen also poses what he names an open-ended question about the Pharisees and scribes, and this older son, that it must have come as a shock, because remember at the beginning of Luke 15, it's the Pharisees and tax collectors, or the Pharisees who are grumbling because Jesus is eating with the sinners. And so this parable is a response to that grumbling. And, Jesus confronts them with their righteousness in this parable. And he says it leaves us face to face with one of life's hardest spiritual choices, to trust or not to trust in God's all forgiving love. I think, how is the prodigal son? I think we can see how he's accepting God's unforgiving love. And I wonder about this elder son. Does he experience that? Do you see hope for his conversion in this text?
Not so much, personally. But, life has a way of teaching us. We have these opportunities to learn and we pass them up. And, God usually gives us another chance to learn it.
Right.
So, at least I see that in my own life.
Well, it's interesting. Yes, we in a sense, we're all prodigal sons and daughters at some point in our life, if we are totally honest with ourselves. If not indeed in idea, where we know that our parents expect a certain thing of us, and we just blow it off and say, no, I'm going to do, something else. And so on many levels, this is something each one of us can be part of.
Right.
And
And
go ahead. Even the older son too. I mean,
yeah.
And I wondered, go ahead, please go ahead.
And yet I see hope in for the older son, in the way the father comes out and from the party and seeks out the older son and explains, why he's forgiving the younger son. It's an olive branch to pull him back into the fold. So I see hope.
Right. And we don't really know the end of this story, but I wonder, now that the prodigal son, the younger son, has, come to himself, will that healing and restoration then, will that cause him to reach out to his brother and try to repair that relationship? Is there hope in that, that once you've fully embraced God's forgiveness and love, the hope is that changes us in such a way that we're able to heal relationships with other people?
I think that's right on. I mean, if you look at the big picture, the whole purpose of our living is to be part of this God family of God, and therefore, you have to learn to work with each other and love each other, and it's harder for some than for others. So it's an ongoing. It's never ending. It's always ongoing and growing.
Right.
You can tell I'm an optimist.
Yeah, it makes me think. I had my mother's father had a dispute with his older brother over an inheritance, and it was bitter, and it lasted for 20, 30 years. And eventually one reached out to the other and they became very good friends. And I remember that, by that point I was a teenager, I guess, but I saw it and I didn't realize the significance of that till I got older. I just thought, well, that's my grandfather and my brother. They just don't talk to each other, but who knows? God's grace working there a little bit. They they came back together, but there's hope.
Yes, our families of origin are certainly places to learn and practice, and maybe unlearn some bad behaviors, hopefully.
Well, somebody picked up the phone and called the other, and that was a little bit of humility, I guess, or putting the other one in front of themselves, but lots of practical applications, I guess.
Yes. I think about in my in my immediate family, my kids, I have there are 3 eldest children who live in my family and 1 younger child. So both my husband and I are firstborns, and then we have 2 daughters. And my younger daughter, her approach to conflict is very different than ours. And so I wonder, it's just interesting to think about those family dynamics. She is a little bit more easygoing and forgiving, I think, than those of us who are the elder, always having, I think there's something about being the eldest child that you want to do the right thing. You want to please. There's this sort of sense of responsibility, and that sometimes doesn't bring out our better qualities.
Amen. I had an older sister.
So are you the youngest?
There were just 2 of us, and
Okay.
it was funny when she went off to Denison and came back at Thanksgiving. I said, "Oh, I really like my sister." It was just an aha moment. I don't know what it was, and we became very close. We were always close, but it was different.
Right.
Because she felt the same way. She had to exceed. She was always aggressive, and I was sort of the easygoing one, and it was just everything you need to learn, you can learn in your family, your blood family, so to speak, because you can't choose them. You're stuck with them.
That is
One
true.
of the lines in the chapter for this week in Nouwen's book was, "Joy and resentment cannot coexist." And it reminded me of a little proverb that's very similar. And it says, "Comparison is the thief of joy." And I think that sibling relationships are so filled with comparison that it is a big challenge to avoid the comparison, which is the thief of joy.
Yes, thank you. I had pulled that quote out because I think Nouwen talks about what are the practices that help us to let go of resentment and to draw closer to God. And he names 2, trust and gratitude. And I think that's true for when we're experiencing that elder son tendency. And Nouwen says that, gratitude, you can practice gratitude that, even when you're not feeling it, you can say, I'm going to be grateful for the gifts that we have, even when we're feeling a little bit resentment, that those things can coexist, and that gratitude, well, no, they can't coexist. Sorry. I wonder if they can, actually. Now that I'm looking at, what are your thoughts on that? Resentment and gratitude and their ability to coexist or not?
Well, I think if you're truly feeling gratitude, it's walking you away from the resentment, because it gives a perspective, and it allows yourself to forgive yourself. We had a Stephen ministry session last night. Once a month we get together for supervision, and we had a speaker talk to us about coping. And I think a huge part of is, we're all so uncertain right now. John was on the call as well. And really just practicing gratitude, it just centers you in a way that, resentment is your off center, but gratitude puts you, I think, center, balance, perspective. And it's not saying you shouldn't be sad or you shouldn't be annoyed, but you forgive yourself, you move on.
Yeah, I agree. And I like that image of, being centered and off-centered. For me, that's a little bit more of a shift, where Nouwen presents it as this binary, they can't coexist. But I wonder if there is the ability to move away and toward, or if it is this, and maybe people experience that in different ways. But there is definitely something very powerful about gratitude and its ability to counter the resentment that we feel. And I think that, the sort of all the parables in Luke 15, Nouwen names this this idea of trust, trust that God is looking for us, that we can be found, and that God wants us home, that God is like that father who is looking out the window, waiting for our return, celebrates when we return. I think it's just a beautiful image, and I'm very grateful for the words and art that help us to explore that. I don't know if there are any other closing thoughts for today. This has been a very rich discussion with it. I think this study could be a year-long study of this one parable in this painting.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, no, it's a great little group.
I want to thank you, Christine, because you put a lot of effort into guiding us with meaningful slides and pictures that generate our discussion.
Yeah, I thought the 2 new pictures that you brought today really added a lot to the conversation.
And I
Thank
say
you.
the same thing. I think that the Rembrandt painting, there are no words, but we have like expressions that we can compare because we have multiple paintings now. So that's really been a bonus. Thank you, Christine.
Oh, well, thank you. And if you find any paintings or art that express this idea of homecoming and relationship with the divine, please feel free to share. I'm always on the lookout. I'm not an art expert or an art critic, but I do find it a very wonderful way to engage with scripture.